Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any members of the public, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you all for joining tonight's special meeting of the board. It is Wednesday, January 26, 2021. Can we have a roll call, please?
Directors English,
Here.
Cardonish,
Here.
Giardini,
Here.
Logan,
Here.
and Peterson.
Okay, if you would, please mute your phone and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm going to skip the public comment session since we have no members of the public on this call this evening. And we'll move to tonight's order of business. This purpose of this meeting is for the Board of Directors to review the status of the existing apparatus, evaluate financial options, and consider authorizing the, it should be, I think, placement of an order for the new Type 1 fire engine from Pierce Manufacturing for a total cost of $830,000. And the reason why this is not a topic that's being deferred to one of our board meetings is that as of February 1st, the cost of the Type 1 fire engine with Pierce will increase 10%. So that is the reason why we're having the meeting this evening. In any event, that's what's going to be discussed, is whether or not we purchase this fire engine and place an order. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our general manager to present. And I should mention that this was a topic that was discussed at the January 14th, 2021 Fire Committee meeting. The outcome of that meeting was not a decision to move forward with a recommendation one way or another. What was asked from the committee is a number of different financial analysis, and I think that's what's going to be presented this evening for the board's consideration. So with that, I'll turn it over to General Manager Briltz.
Yes, thank you much. Again, as Board President Logan stated, this is a item that came before the Fire Committee just about 10 days ago. So I apologize to you now for not having a more comprehensive staff report and better explanation of the financial alternatives. So hopefully you'll bear with us. We would like to treat tonight's meeting as kind of a workshop style where we go through some of this information in as much detail as you would like. Our goal is to make sure you're fully informed on the situation as well as the financial impacts of the various alternatives. So if you don't have any questions about what we're going to cover, I'd like to start by asking Chief Peterson he's got a sort of an overview of the current apparatus situation and a little information on what different types of apparatus can do or are capable of. And then we can come back and evaluate some financial background and the options of the various financing options or financial impacts that the Fire Committee requested we put together.
Yeah, thank you, General Manager Briltz and President Logan and members of the board. As General Manager Briltz said, again, this is coming to you as a result of a pretty significant price increase on most engines throughout the industry right now. A lot of these are supply chain demand issues, just cost of goods and those types of things. So let me attempt to share my screen here. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint here?
That's a yes.
Okay. So, as mentioned, the current condition of 7195, a lot of you may know, has had some pump issues, causing, delays and concerns with regards to engaging the pump. The pump has been doing this for a period of time, and it's getting a little more consistent with how many times it doesn't go into pump. We had our first instance of it not going into pump on an incident just a couple weeks ago. The item that we're looking at with regards to its consistency is one of our biggest concerns, and we're a little concerned about putting a lot of money into a 20-year-old engine. It would be a useful backup engine or a training engine for us when it is out of frontline service. Cost on repairs, I think I've mentioned this to several board members in the past, but we've spent approximately $14,000 in 2021. And there's still a lot of issues that need to be addressed. The pump issues itself and a few of the other things that would coincide with it could be in the range of approximately $100,000. I can't get a clear estimate from the repair shop, which would be South Coast, is where I've got most of these numbers, because it's kind of like a vehicle that goes into a shop. Until they get into it, they can't give me a clear and concise estimate. I'm going to attempt to play this video for you, but this is kind of a description. It didn't play well last time from General Manager Britz's computer, but we'll give it a shot.
Neutral, brakes on. It's not going into 4, it's going into 5, which means it's not engaged. The mile per hours are not up, which means that again, it's not engaged. The light indicator is lighting up on the pump controller. So now the operation will be to take it out of pump again, attempt another time to go into pump. If that does not work, the operator will have to move the engine forward, backwards a couple of times to get the pump to engage. Order, neutral, pump. Lead reverse. Disengaged. 2 lights. And 4. 5 mile per hour. The pump is engaged. And how many attempts did that take this morning? That's the third attempt. Third attempt to get the engine to engage in the pump. Neutral, brakes
Whoops.
on.
Okay, with that being said, I hope that played on everyone's screen and you could see what was going on there. I'd like to cover the need for a backup type 1 engine. Again, with the amount of calls that we're experiencing, a type 1 frontline engine is our workhorse. It's the engine that goes out and does the bulk of the work. It goes out on the medical calls, it goes out on the vehicle accidents, vehicle fires, structure fires. So it does the bulk of the work with regards to our services that we provide the community. A couple things with that is if we have a structure fire, and we, especially in the summertime, and we see a significant drawdown in the county during fire season, having a backup type 1 engine can also aid us if we were waiting on what we call auto aid or mutual aid engines to come and assist us. We have enough local reserves now, and folks that live nearby are full-time folks to be able to respond to second engine, which could be critical for us and not require us to wait for out of area responses. Again, even when we're in a situation, it's beneficial to have that engine on back-to-back calls. So if we have an extended on-scene time where our engine, our first frontline engine is experiencing a long on-scene time, whether it's a code or waiting for a ruptured gas line and we're providing security, that backup engine can be, that backup type 1 can be staffed with additional personnel. Why now? As we mentioned, number one is the increased lack of reliability, which kind of adds some liability on us. We had an incident, and it was January 7th, where we pulled up to the report of a structure fire at 1760 Las Tablas. The engine wasn't going into pump at that point. Now, thank goodness it wasn't a significant fire. It was inside of a wall. We did have to tear apart some of the exterior and interior wall of this residence and found a fire that had been burning for quite some time. But the pump took, or the engine took several times to go back and forth in and out of pump. Excuse me. Again, cost of repairs, $14,021, and we still have some issues. As I mentioned, on February 1st, we're going to see a 10% increase. The approximate cost of the engine is $830,000. After February 1st, we're looking at $913,000, about an $83,000 increase. The other concerning aspect is the build time. Build times right now for most apparatus are extended because of supply chain shortages and those things, workers, etc. So we're looking at a 17-month build time, even if we order now, which will put us into May or June of 2023. How do we do it? Staff's recommendation is that we use the capital facilities funding, and with projects that are coming in and projects on the horizon, we anticipate capital facilities monies to still be coming in and replace some of the money that we will see exhausted for this engine purchase. If we purchase the engine, we're still looking at $1.6 million for a fire station expansion if we proceed with that. The fire station expansion can be phased to accommodate the current funding. And then we obviously have to keep asset replacement and continue to put money into asset replacement. And General Manager Broltz will give you the presentation on the financial data that we've done on a financial outlook. So there are several options to asset replacement. I won't get into too much detail. I kind of covered these with the fire committee, but out of county assignments can bring in money, billing for service grants, those types of things, and continuing obviously to pay into that capitals. The one thing I do want to bring the board up to speed on is the different types of engines. So this is just a brief rundown of the different types of engines. The type 1 engine is what you see here in this picture. And like I say, it's our workhorse. They're typically larger tanks, larger pumps. They can deploy an array of ladders that will get us to 2-story buildings. So they typically have a 24-foot extension ladder, a roof ladder. They carry a lot more tools. They have a lower ground clearance, and the compartments are lower. So when we're taking out these heavy tools, we're not as apt to get a back injury or something of that nature. In addition, they carry breathing apparatus, all of our medical gear extrication tools, and a variety of other specialty tools that other engines typically don't carry. So that's kind of in a nutshell what a Type 1 engine looks like. A Type 2 engine is very similar to a Type 1 engine. They have a lot of the same complements that a Type 1 engine have. They have that same low profile on the compartment space. So again, avoiding the back injuries on the heavy tools like our jaws of life, our extrication tools, those types of things. They carry the SCBAs, the medical gear, those types of things, and all the different types of specialty equipment that a Type 1 would carry. They're just a shorter wheelbase. Typically, they have a little bit higher clearance than a Type 1, and they're typically a little cheaper than a Type 1 engine. A Type 3 engine, which is this is almost identical to what we have now. These are 4-wheel drive engines. They're made for going over, excuse me, made for going over rough terrain, and they have a maximum pump of typically 250 to 500 gallons per minute with a 500-gallon tank. So smaller pumps, sometimes smaller tanks. And again, they don't typically carry SCBAs. We carry some in ours, some do, but they don't carry those specialty equipments, in particular, extrication tools, things of that nature. The reason they don't is you can see a higher level of ground clearance, and the compartments are much higher. So you're kind of asking for the potential of back injury by taking out those heavier equipments on higher compartments. That's it in a nutshell. And I'm available for any questions.
And do any board members, Director English?
Yeah, just a quick question. You mentioned that the Type 2 is cheaper than the Type 3. How much cheaper? And why is that one not the product specified if it's cheaper?
The Type 2 is only typically about 10% maybe. So depending upon how they design, there's not a standard Type 2 engine out there. It would be a design, so a design built. So for example, the old 7185 that was sold, that was a Type 2 engine. It was not 4-wheel drive, but it had a higher ground clearance, but it had lower compartment profiles. It was a specialty built engine, and it was designed from the factory to be a Type 2 engine. It doesn't do all of the things that a Type 1 engine can do, particularly MasterStream appliances, those types of things. Those all have to be designed into it. And again, you're getting close to a Type 1 engine, not quite, but it would be sufficient for a backup to a Type 1 engine if your primary Type 1 went out of service.
So a Type 2 would not meet all of your daily needs. Is that correct?
Correct. As far as being able to pump commercial structure fires and those types of things, typically a Type 2 is going to come with 1,000 GPM pump, where your Type 1s now come with 1,500 to 2,000 GPM pumps. And the compartment space also is less on a Type 2 than a Type 1.
Thank you.
Okay. Director Fardanish.
Thank you for the report. So I have a concern regarding if we do approve this and moves forward, it's still going to be 17 months away. Currently, it seems like we are having quite a bit of problem with the engine that we have. So I am concerned that it could lead to some, hopefully, it won't, but that could lead to something that you guys aren't able to do your job. So are there any backup plans for the next 17 months? So that way, make sure that you guys have the right equipment for your job?
Yeah, the only backup plan would be to continue to keep it well maintained and well serviced, and jump on any potential issues right away with South Coast Fire, or South Coast Fire, which is the garage or the shop that we use to repair engines, which is just up in Paso. If it does go out of service, Currently, there are two what we call OES engines in the county that we can borrow. But when we borrow those engines, we are on the hook to go out of county with those engines. So as soon if the state calls for an OES engine strike team, we're obliged to send it with our personnel if we're using it.
Are there any programs where you could possibly rent them or lease them short term?
No.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, so, and I just have a comment following Director Vardanish's comments. It seems as though the repairs do need to be made in order to continue to have a Type 1 engine to meet the needs of the fire department. The issue is going to be the timing of those repairs. We know if we delay on having those repairs, we could move into the summer months, which are high, fire season, although we seem like we have a 12-month fire season, but it's more likely that any OAS loaner would be pulled. So we do need to kind of make some decisions with respect to those repairs sooner than later. And I think that it might help if we move to the financial analysis, because I think that's where we really have the linchpin is how to fund this request for Type 1. And it does present a number of issues. So I'm going to turn it over to General Manager Broltz, and then we'll open it back up for additional questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can everyone see a spreadsheet on my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so what I want to start with is just by way of background. This you can't see the whole thing because I have it large enough that hopefully you can see the numbers. This was passed out in the part of the packet. This is what you're looking at here is the financial model that was done by the district and the economists that we hired back in the winter and early spring of 2019, and led to the determination about how much Measure A should be in the ballot question. So I don't want to go through this in a lot of detail, but I wanted to remind you of a couple of things on here. One, you can see here this was a 10-year plan that took us through, or 10-year projection took us through fiscal year 29-30. That's now about 8 years away. There were assumptions made with regard to revenues that we would receive and all the line items that our budget contains. And then these various assumptions were escalated using varying factors throughout the model period. And what I wanted to kind of highlight or just remind you is, you may recall that the bottom line, and some of you haven't seen this or may not have studied this for some time. The bottom line was, with the implementation of Measure A in the early years, these years I'm highlighting here, this is these early years of the implementation following Measure A of 24-hour service, there was just a slight surplus available. You can see 38,000, 25, 51. This is again modeled. We haven't tracked exactly like this, but there was a slight surplus, and then that in the middle years, I say years 3, 4, 5, or 4, 5, and 6, this surplus declined, so that because expenses increased faster than revenues in the model, because based on those assumptions, and then in years 7, 8, 9, and 10, there were deficits that were forecast. And of course, this doesn't just end and everything look assumed to be ideal in year 11, but the model just doesn't go any further. But you can see the pattern here was the model forecasted an increasing deficit. And that is why we knew that in the early years, we needed to set aside money to cover the operational deficit that was expected or predicted, not necessarily going to occur, but predicted to occur in those later years. And we've begun to do that. You set aside like $90,000 this year just to cover some of these outer years because of an expected surplus in the current year. Now, the Fire Emergency Management Committee reviewed this spreadsheet and the assumptions in a pretty detailed review in August, probably spent about 2 hours going over the various assumptions and whatnot. And I'll just paraphrase. My conclusion of that was the committee felt like that was a worthwhile exercise, should be done annually. But we were kind of too early to make any adjustments to the model. Some things were tracking better, some things were tracking worse. It was sort of too soon to see if the model needed to be adjusted. I will say that there are a number of conservative elements in the revenue forecast, which I think was smart. So there's reason to believe that some of these figures like property taxes and CFD fees can exceed the model as time goes by to a certain extent. It's not a radical change that I would expect, but we should do a little bit better than the model predicted. And there were certain expenses that we thought could be lower than the model forecast, like health insurance. Once we're able to use the OPEB set aside to pay for retiree health insurance, we expected a savings there. However, there were other line items where the model didn't set aside enough money and that we're going to be over on. And we went over those with the Fire Committee, but the overall, back in August, but the overall picture was, it's still quite early. We've only been, we're only really 15 months into 24/7 program. And so it was too early to recommend changes or significant adjustments to the model's assumptions. The next area I wanted to highlight for you in the model before taking any questions on this or we move on to the next section is the other analysis that we did as it relates to this decision that you're considering contemplating today. It relates to the asset replacement contribution. And so you're going to see, or we're going to go through some options, and it's going to compare. You'll see a line item in those spreadsheets that compare to the asset replacement in the model. And that's really comparing this line item. It's labeled as strategic financial policies or the depreciation, the 100% asset replacement contribution. So we've just carried these figures forward into these other spreadsheets. So when you're looking at this, and I'll show you again that it's really comparing to the original model, so you can see how the decisions affect this one line item up or down based on how what decision is made with regard to the purchase of new equipment or how long they're depreciated for, etc. So are there any questions about the original 2019 model that you want to review now before I go on to the newer work that we produced over the last 10 days or so?
I'm good.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull up another spreadsheet. Now we provided this spreadsheet to you in the packet, the packet posted online, and also we emailed it to you in Excel in case you really wanted to dive in and play with the numbers and whatnot. I don't expect all of you have done that yet, but that's what we had done. So I'm now showing that same file that we emailed to you, and so if you should be able to see it on the screen, but if you've printed it out, hopefully all this information still matches. So just by way of a little background, when this item came to the Fire Committee about 10 days ago, the committee looked at two alternatives, which are labeled tabs 1 and 2. And at the time, we only had modeled them through the first 10 years. The committee said, we want the model to go beyond 10 years because these impacts look like they're getting bigger at the end. And so we've extended this 5 additional years. Now, when we extended the model for the depreciation line item or the asset replacement contribution line item, we just extended that same assumption, growing by 5% a year, which is what the model originally used. So if the model had been 5 years longer, these would have been the numbers that would have been in it. Now, we didn't provide you with in the packet copies of every tab. We ended up coming up with 11 different alternatives, which is a lot to chew on. So we wanted to narrow it down to some more attractive options. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up for 1 second. The second thing, originally when this came to the committee, the fire chief's recommendation was to proceed with ordering a new Type 1 engine. Kind of just hope that 7195 held up with this pump issue while we're waiting for the new engine, and then continue to use 7195 as a backup engine, but not necessarily repair it. During the course of the meeting, it became clear that the fire committee members wanted to see that repair take place, both for its use over the ensuing months while we're waiting for the engine build, assuming that occurs, or if that occurs. And if it also if it's an effective backup, it needs to have a reliable pump. We're going to start by looking at what I'll call tab 3. These things are numbered in the upper left-hand corner on the copies that were posted online. You can see that in the cell A1 if you're trying to follow along using a paper version or some other computer screen. So what this version, this tab 3 is, or the spreadsheet I have up right now is a 15-year look at what the chief is recommending, plus making a repair to 7195 in the near term. And there's a number of assumptions that are, without some of these things I'm going to walk you through just sort of once, and then I don't think you'll need to look at them from spreadsheet to spreadsheet. But these spreadsheets track forward all the current depreciation account items, all the current engines and other significant excuse me, items that we're depreciating. Then this middle section here, rows 15 through 19, depreciate additions to the assets of the fire fund. So again, we show where those are increased. There's a number of assumptions here about when they take effect. Don't get too concerned about whether something arrives a month earlier or a month later. That has a really small impact on any given year. It's more these were sort of placeholder figures. I don't think it's material if you do order an engine and it arrives 2 months earlier than January 1st, 2024, or 2 months later. It's not that material to the model, to what we've done. Then lines 24 through 26 are really the comparative analysis. Line 24 is what our updated calculation to depreciation or asset replacement would be for each of the fiscal years shown. Line 25 is a copy and paste from the original 2019 model plus forecasted forward. And line 26, probably the one that's worth looking at, is and this is again the same on all these various options, is the difference between what was originally projected and what would occur if you followed these set of assumptions. Now, the next piece of information that's probably worth looking at is we wanted to make sure that whatever we were modeling could cash flow. And so this lowest section, or the bottom of these spreadsheets, are some figures based on the beginning balance, the asset replacement account, that fiscal year's contribution, any other proceeds, and like, for example, this cell I've highlighted right now is the net sale price of the rescue that we sold here about a month ago. And so that is shown as income to asset replacement. Then you have the expected ending balance. I'll just touch on this just for a second. This little bolded number at the very bottom is exactly half of the ending balance, because our current strategic financial policy says that, and this is district-wide, that in any given year, only half of the available asset replacement balance can be used. It's sort of a forced savings account. So that's again coming from the current strategic financial policies. And so this carries forward through all of these years. So this first option, the tab 3, and again, hopefully the other tabs will go much quicker. This first option, tab 3, is what the fire chief's recommendation was originally. Purchase this this engine. I'm sorry. Purchase this Type 1 engine at $830,000. The current strategic financial policy has us depreciate vehicles up to 10 years, between 5 and 10 years. So there's a 10-year depreciation life. We make some assumptions in here about the fire station expansion, how much it costs, what year it is capitalized or completed and enters the books. In this case, it's assumed January 1st, 2026, about 4 years from now. It's depreciated over 40 years. That's buildings in our plan. And then there's also some assumptions about when the existing 7195, that's the engine that we're having the trouble with now, would be ultimately replaced. In this case, it's modeled at year 2030, and it's how much it would be depreciated for, and we've escalated the cost a bit since that's eight years down the road. And then we add the addition here is this repair. This the repair is a transmission pump repair. We're using a placeholder of $100,000 for this purpose. In any event, you can follow these through each of the years. That's probably not super important. I'll highlight some trouble areas when they're obvious. And then at the very end, you can see here we've totaled the cumulative impact to this decision, so to speak, or this scenario, as it relates to what the model had predicted or had suggested a few years back. So you might recall that based on all those assumptions in the model, we were kind of good for 10 years, but entering kind of a more challenging fiscal times toward the end of the model based on those assumptions. What this decision, if it's implemented just as illustrated, this will essentially have another $1 million negative impact over the next 13 years because of the additional asset replacement contributions that are required. So that's the first thing to highlight, and we've got that number for each of these scenarios. If it's in parentheses, it's a negative. All the options have a negative impact to the model's prediction, financially speaking. The other thing to look at here is how is the cash flow on some of these future year replacements. And if you go to the bottom here, the cell I'm highlighting now shows the beginning balance in year 2029. And then we receive a new piece of equipment at about $1 million, and we have to we can fund it, we can cash flow it, but in order to do so, you need to exceed, you would need to violate the model violate the policy and spend more than half in any given year to make that happen. And then this $20,000 of income is the sale of the equipment that we just replaced, in this case, 7195. These figures are just gross estimates, they're just sort of placeholder figures. I have no idea what engine 7195 would be worth in 8 years. But I know we didn't get much money for our 2 older pieces of equipment that we sold 3 and 6 years ago, so that's probably not too far off. So are there any questions before I move on to the other scenarios? These things are probably only helpful in a comparative way, but I do want to make sure you follow what went into this and what each thing means.
I have a question. When you said, when we had to purchase that other vehicle, I don't know what year it was, for the $1 million there, and we were going to have to violate the policy to purchase because we'd be keeping less than half of our monies, or spending more than half of our monies, which the policy is right now. The policy only allows us at 50%. Is that what you're saying? So
yes, that's what I'm saying. You have the money in the account. It's just the policy says that you wouldn't spend more than half in any given year. Now, this is something that you've already kind of tackled once before. When we ordered engine 7160, we were unsure as to whether or not by the time it arrived, we would have saved up enough to cover double its cost. And the board proceeded with ordering it. And as it turned out, we didn't need to exceed half because it landed like it came later than what was expected, and we were able to save up a little bit more money. But that's what I'm talking about. You can see that you have in this case, you have, about $1.55 million to work with. But half of that would only be about 750,000, and you're in this case writing a check for a little over $1 million. So you're exceeding that 50% threshold.
And what year are you,
in this scenario?
right, and what year are you, I'm sorry, it was, I printed these out in
Okay, I mean,
2930.
you're 20, again, this is all, I mean, this could change, right? But this is looking out in the future. This is 8 years from now, or,
Okay,
year 2930. So if this were modeled further out, if we had delayed this another couple years, then that wouldn't be necessary. But we thought that might be also unrealistic. I mean, we don't know how long 7195 can last even as a backup engine. At that point, it will be, getting close to 30 years old, even with repairs. So, but you're not making this decision today or even next year, right? I mean, you're not placing this order for 6 or 7 years. So you'd have more information then to base that decision. We just wanted to illustrate what it would look like if this were the decision that were made.
I have a question related to that as well. This is Jeff. Hey, in regard to the replacement of 7195, because I looked at that number as well, because that really throws the model off pretty significantly. Is the replacement of that a result of the fact that we're using capital to expand the use of our equipment and adding a piece of equipment? Because right now we only have one Type 1.
So the answer is yes, although I have some options that don't do that. That was one thing the Fire and Emergency Management Committee wanted us to explore at this meeting. And so we'll walk you through some of those options. But yeah, the short answer is yes. If you make the decision to use capital funds, which were derived from development impact fees, you're doing so under the premise that the development has produced higher demands on services and you need to maintain more apparatus going forward. Now, I'm not here to tell you that that is a decision that you end up living with for eternity. And certainly decisions can be made down the road, but you absolutely cannot use development impact fee sourced funds to simply replace a piece of equipment, like for like. So
Sure,
you
I get
cannot
that.
use that funding source to just replace engine 7195 and then sell it the following year and just keep one piece of equipment. We wouldn't have actually grown our capabilities by doing so.
So my question is then, and I didn't see it, is there a model that doesn't use capital funds that doesn't hold us to the replacement? So we could actually
Yes.
buy a new piece of equipment, replace it through some kind of other financing strategy, and not have that significant ticket item out 7-8 years from now.
Yes, and we'll get to those in just a couple minutes. Well,
Okay,
we'll get to those before we're done here. I don't know how fast, but
And-
yeah, I have several options that show just that. And so that was actually one of the items that the Fire and Emergency Management Committee, or we discussed, was really going from using and owning 2 large pieces of equipment to 3 is a policy change. And what would it look like if we just replaced 7195? So we have a couple of different scenarios on that. One thing I do want to just kind of point out is these numbers. I talked about this having $1 million or $1,021,000 impact. That's really, again, just to that one line item. If we add another piece of equipment, some of the other line items are likely going to be increasing too. If you're owning and maintaining 3 large pieces of equipment, it's going to cost more than owning and maintaining 2. That being said, today's discussion isn't that fine-tuned. I don't have an estimate of what the additional maintenance costs are going to be for that, 5 and 6 and 7 years from now. So it's not nearly as material as this matter, but it is something to sort of keep in mind. And the type and number of pieces of equipment that the districts owned or the fire funds owned has changed over time. You know, we just got rid of a piece of equipment. So theoretically, there should be some short-term savings there by not maintaining that. Nonetheless, and you're correct, just I think you had a little short discussion on this earlier. For, you know, between 3 years ago and 20 some years ago, the district had 2 large pieces of equipment, and a type 1 and a type 2, and the type 2 served as the backup to the type 1. And when we replaced the type 2 with the type 3 or the 7160, I think I was remiss in not understanding that we were giving up some capabilities that the type 2 had that we no longer had as a backup engine for structure fires. And we've essentially lost some of those backup capabilities when we did that. So anyways, this is this first tab. This was tab number 3 or option number 3. This was, again, based on the fire committee's input. This was developed. If you're ready, I can go through the other tabs that we provided to you. The options, we can go through these as much detail as you'd like, but I did want to go through the ones that we passed out because they were really as a result of some requests from the Fire and Emergency Management Committee to incorporate or consider different scenarios. So if I go to tab 4, this is again number 4 in that cell A1 on the top. This is really the same set of decisions, same dates, etc. The one thing that changed is we made an assumption, or I'm sorry, this scenario assumes that the board is willing to change or modify its strategic financial guidelines in 2 areas. The first is that certain vehicles can be depreciated up to 15 years, large apparatus. And that's probably only applicable to the fire fund, but I haven't thought about it fully enough, but there may be a few other pieces of equipment that have that kind of a life to them. I do want to point out that the way our asset replacement fund works is the depreciation hits the books only after the asset's here, and the asset replacement contribution is based on the prior fiscal year's depreciation schedule. So when we say we're going to depreciate something for 10 years, the last year of asset replacement that goes towards its depreciation could be as late as 12 years after the asset arrived. So this assumption of going to a 15-year schedule for some of this apparatus is kind of saying, hey, we think it's going to last at least 17 years. So it's a change. This would be a change in policy. I don't think I would not characterize it as an aggressive change in policy. It still has some conservative principles, and we would be cautious about what, I would never recommend that you'd be depreciating like pickup trucks or more standard vehicles for that kind of life. Even though we often get that many years out of them or more, it's just not a good practice. But for certain large equipment that's really going to have a 20 years life, 15 to 20 year life, maybe it's appropriate. So that's the main change on item number 4. There's one other change that really doesn't show up in the math, except for here at the very bottom. This change also would, again, these can be independently considered, but this scenario, any of these worksheets that say change strategic financial policies, they do both. This would extend the amount that could be spent in any one year from 50% to 75%. And that helps alleviate a few things in some of the scenarios, and it doesn't alleviate everything. But anyway, that's just something for you to consider. Again, this decision, these policy changes would not have to be approved tonight, but I wanted you to realize what kind of assumptions we made in order to get these kind of cash flow models. So the big difference here on this one, this will really compare this to tab 3. You go down the line, just by extending that out from 10 to 15 years over this 15-year window, that goes from like $1 million impact to the negative to about a $615,000 impact to the negative. So it's significantly more tolerable financially over this next 13 years. It's still a huge hit, $615,000 to the negative. This also changes the cash flow a bit. You have the same set of scenarios here. Again, this is all the same assumptions about these years, but here you're replacing 7195. But because your depreciation amounts are smaller, because they're spread out longer, even by increasing this to from 50% to 75% in any 1 year, you still have to sort of violate that policy or that guideline. You can cash flow it. You have the same scenario. You've got 1.4 million bucks roughly, and so you can write a check for $1 million, but you have to exceed the 75% threshold and clearly exceed the 50% threshold to do so. Okay, so that's the main differences between items 3 and 4. Those are very similar to what we showed the fire committee at its meeting, except for this modeling is now extended 15 years instead of the original 10, or I'm sorry, extended to 2035 instead of to 2030. That's the only difference. And then we provided some other, whoops. So all the other items I'm going to show you are kind of new. These were items that were not studied in depth. They were discussed conceptually, but not shown or studied with the committee, and they've been more recently developed. So this item 5 or tab 5, A1 tab 5, this also assumes that you're changing the strategic financial policies for 15 years. You're fixing 7195 as the committee had stated should be in the model. And in this case, we postpone the station expansion to see what it would do. So you can see here, we have this depreciation over 180 months. That's the same as tab 4 was. We're still depreciating the building expansion by the 40 years. However, we've postponed the implementation of the station expansion by another 6 years. So now it doesn't, instead of taking being in place in 2026, it's 2032. So it's 10 years from now, so a ways out. And because that, and so everything else is the same set of assumptions. And you can come over here and you can see, okay, now we're down to a $290,000 impact. But what were the trade-offs? Well, we've postponed, the big trade-off here is we've postponed the station expansion work. And so we're living with what we have or planning to for 10 years. So that's a long time. You know about the deficiencies in the changes. Our operational changes have created these deficiencies. Our operational changes due to being staffed 24/7, et cetera. So that's a significant trade-off, but now you're down to $288,000 impact. This item, this tab 5, and by the way, you don't if you ultimately today or tomorrow or whenever you get ready to make this decision, you base it on one of these assumptions. It doesn't mean that we're locked in, right? It doesn't mean that now from this point forward we absolutely cannot do the station expansion for 10 years. It just means that's what we modeled. And if the financial situation improves sooner than that, you could do it sooner. That being said, it's still a $288,000 cumulative impact to the negative on the O&M budget over this period of time. And that we were, especially these out years, these final 5 years of this model, which the original 2019 model never included, we were already in deficit spending mode. So we have to, we're going to talk about things like raising revenue. We have to raise revenue just for everything else to stay the same. And we've got or cut other expenses. And now we've got to deal with this additional, whatever kind of model figure you're looking at. But this becomes the most attractive of the options, the most attractive financially of the options you've looked at so far. Again, item 5. And the cash flow, I think is very similar to the last one. It's actually identical. It's a little bit worse off because you're not putting depreciation towards that station expansion in these earlier years. So you can still cash flow this purchase, but you have to exceed 75%. And really you have to use almost all the money to do so, to make this, to replace 7195. So there's lots of trade-offs with all of these different options. I'll go on if there's not a specific question on that one. I'm going to go to the next tab, number 6. Again, now we're going to get into some these next options are what you asked about, board member English, in terms of maintaining 2 pieces of apparatus. So the last several say, hey, we're not yet ready to own and maintain 3. We recognize we have a problem with what we have, but let's figure out a way to do so and just keep 2. So these next several options do that. This model changes the strategic financial policies the same way that I discussed a moments ago, and it maintains just 2 large pieces of apparatus. As a matter of fact, the next several options do that. There are some subtle differences between them, but they do affect the impacts. So in this case, this mod item 6 assumes you order 7195's replacement essentially now, and it comes by 1/1/24. That you're doing the station expansion and it's in place by 2026. That you buy a type 2 engine, because we know that the type 3 engine is not providing an adequate backup for the type 1. So that you order a type 2 engine or you have it delivered here in 2027. That's this, just for modeling purposes, it's modeled at $650,000. We do not have a price quote on that, and that's still 5 years away. So whatever we had today wouldn't be very, it'd be expected to be more anyways. And then you still repair 7195 because that was requested to be included in all of these options. So that's what this assumes. You can kind of go out, you can look year by year at this. I'm not sure how helpful it is, but this has a negative cumulative impact of about $536,000. So that it's still you're still having to depreciate 2 new pieces of equipment. So that's why this is fairly significant. Additionally, you're going to run into some cash flow problems on this. They're not, actually this one here is fairly horrendous. You can, when this piece of equipment comes in a couple of years, the replacement to the type 1 replacement, it costs more than double the amount of money that you have in the asset replacement fund. So it would require some financing. You don't have enough extra money here. This could be a combination of this could be external or internal financing. In other words, the fire fund could take a loan from its own capital fund, or you could dip into the fund balance. But really, this would almost consume the fund balance. It would be a little bit concerning if that were the plan. And you could see the cash flow here is problematic for about 5 years. You end up with negative fund balances, twice real significant ones that are going to take financing to fix. So if you pick this model, we got to do some more work to figure out how to make it all work. But I think it's still helpful to look at this as an alternative. So that was requested by the fire committee. That's been included. We made some other options here that I think are worth looking at. This option is the same as we just showed you. However, this has you using a lease program. We got quotes from Pierce Manufacturing. The lease terms are not attractive in my mind. They'd end up being about $130,000 worth of interest paid over 10 years. We did not try to price other lease options, but you could, and you would not need to do that or make that decision at the time of placement of order, but only at the time you take delivery. So leases are commonly, lease financing is commonly used by municipalities. It's available kind of over the counter. It doesn't take that much time. I've done this kind of financing before, not very concerned about it. This is the direction you want to go. You just have to have the lease information lined up by the time you write the check for the engine. Again, that's a year and a half or 2 years from now at the earliest. So this uses This uses the same assumptions. However, under this model, we pushed out to try to make it more affordable, like we did earlier. I want to make sure that didn't. No, yeah, that does change. We pushed out the implementation of the fire station expansion just to make this more affordable. But when you add the lease payment in here, in this whole thing, oh yeah, I hope I didn't mislabel this. Where is it at? I'm sorry, I'm showing the wrong number. So I probably have some numbering, a number situation. This is option 8, and I think I probably skipped giving you this one. This is that scenario. This is the same as option 6, only leasing. You see the lease payments shown here in this model. For the purposes of comparing it to the original Measure A model, I lumped these costs in with asset replacement. There wasn't another line item to put it in for comparative purposes. So now you can see the cumulative impact. If we lease, this jumps to about $1.5 million to the negative over these 13 years. The cash flow on the asset replacement stays strong because you're not needing to dip into it. This does keep us at 2 pieces of equipment, and you do end up with a lot more asset replacement funds at the end of the year, or the end of the model period. So apologize for some confusion on that. I wanted to make sure there wasn't something in item 7 that I wanted to, oh yeah, I'm sorry. The big change for item 7, and it's mislabeled on top, is that this, instead of lease purchasing, this pushes out the fire station expansion. Again, this has a real positive impact over the model period. The total negative cost now is about $210,000. We've already talked about the trade-offs there. And it still has this cash flow challenge. It's a little bit worse in these years here because when you push off the asset replacement contributions, you're not saving as much money each year. And so it creates cash flow problems down the road for replacing other pieces of equipment. 8 is the one I just went through. And then number 9, and I'm sorry, I know this is really dragging on. We only have a couple more to look at that I think are worth considering. This does the same thing as this is a lease, but pushing out the station expansion again. So you incorporate the lease and the station expansion, and that brings that $1.5 million negative to 1.2. Again, when you incorporate the lease, you don't have any cash flow problems in the asset replacement account, but you've got this big, $1 million plus impact to the operating fund over the model period of time. I'm just, again, going to try to move a little quickly. Just want to show you a couple more things. And then we can get to some questions. And then number 11, this is the last piece that we showed you. This rearranges the order in which you do a few of these things. You're still pushing out the station expansion, not quite as far. And under this scenario, you're replacing the Type 3 engine sooner because it's a less expensive with a Type 2, which is a less expensive asset. And then you're repairing in 7195 soon. This is modeled as 7122, so this year. And then ordering its replacement about 6 years from now, or I'm sorry, getting delivery of the replacement 6 years from now. And you postpone the station expansion. So we're just trying to get as creative as possible to minimize these impacts. And you can kind of scroll over here and see that this has, all of a sudden, this looks like the most attractive financial option. I'll get into some issues in a moment. That's what we're trying to come up with is how can we give you an option that you can be confident can work financially. So this looks more attractive. These numbers are not as intimidating. You spread this $166,000 out over, 12 or 13 years. And it's, now it's, something like $20,000 a year to the negative instead of maybe 100,000 on some of the other options. However, you can see it does have some cash flow problems. Again, that we'd have to deal with. It's not impossible. We can do some internal loans. And then you end up with a relatively modest or small asset replacement balance. I do want to highlight for all of these that this, in my mind, is the problem with where we're starting. We're starting with we got this paltry beginning balance of the asset replacement fund. You have assets at the fire fund that cost nearly $1 million to replace, and yet the bank account only has $300,000 in it. So that really is a result of two things. One, a fairly recent engine purchase, 7160, although that wasn't a, that was 300 grand. And two, the district did not contribute to asset replacement in any of its funds for about 5 years following the recession. So we'll feel the consequence of that for decades, because you're behind and you just can't catch up. It's most apparent in the fire fund, but it's really everywhere. But the fire fund obviously has big ticket items that will need replacement. So finally, there's a little, I'm not sure how you want to look at this, but we did this little comparison. So I was showing you these figures in the negative on all of these different options. This is, okay, this was what we were really first concentrating on, is what is its cumulative impact over this model period to the operating fund. That's what I'm really concerned about, right? We know we've got a very, very tight budget. So how much do these various decisions impact the operating fund? And based on these various choices, they swing a lot, from $1.5 million to $166,000. But that doesn't tell the full story. This 166 might look attractive, but you really also probably want to look at the projected asset replacement fund balance. Again, that's one of the things we're struggling with. If we had $2 or $3 million in the asset replacement fund today, I don't think this would be a tough decision. We would ask you to authorize the order to replace 7195, and you wouldn't have to be concerned with all the other implications. You have the money in the bank to do so, but we don't. So that this is a concern. So what this comparison also does is look at the projected ending. This is 2035 asset replacement balance. Huge swings based on the decisions, from having roughly $560,000. So at that time, less than half the money to replace a Type 1 engine, very likely, to having $1.7 million on a couple of these scenarios, 1.8 in the lease option scenario. So it's probably not that these are equals, in terms of, I mean, they're all dollars, so every dollar's worth the same, but it might make sense for comparative purposes to kind of look at this and say, okay, hey, maybe there's a balance between what the surplus of, again, if you're going to proceed, what the surplus is or the deficit is, compare, with the asset replacement balance. And so this is what this total number kind of does, and says, look, the bigger the number, the better the district is off financially at that moment in time. Now you've got 13 years of ebbs and flows and how to get there, and other challenges, and some of the options we presented are probably not doable without financing. But I think this points out that this option of 106, this option 11, which was the last one we walked through, while it looks good on this front, it leaves us in a really poor situation on the projected asset replacement balance. And really 15 years from now, we're having the same conversation. How do we replace that piece of equipment when it's due? So that's a consideration. So the bigger the number, the better they are cumulatively financially. So just to the operating fund, this doesn't really address the other funds. So I'm happy. I'm sure you have some questions, and so let me know what I can try to clarify.
So with that, thank you very much for all those financial models. I think the information is revealing. And with that, I'll open it up to members of the board for questions. Director English.
Thank you. Now, one item in there that really kind of threw me, and I'm not really sure why, is the replacement of the Type 3 to have a Type 2. Where did that come from? I didn't follow on us having to replace the Type 3 engine, and that was a $600,000 costs and
Yeah,
you
so
kind of
let me
inserted
try to-
that without any explanation.
Sorry, let me try to go really fast. We spent about 3 hours talking about this at the fire committee meeting and probably skipped some important things. All getting a little bit muddy to me, but so on those last several scenarios, you saw that replacement of the type 3. It isn't because we envision the type 3 needing replacement in that short period of time, but because on all those scenarios, you only maintain one type 1 engine. And so it was determined, the fire chief has said, look, if we're only going to have one type 1 engine, his preference or his request is to have an effective backup to that, which would be a type 2 and not the type 3. We did explore other things like trying to modify the type 3 to serve as an effective backup, and that was dismissed earlier as a not very good option by the fire committee members back in December. So that's why on the last several options, those options only keep us with 2 large pieces of apparatus. And if that's the plan, the fire chief saying, if we're going to only have 2 and they're not going to be and only one's a type 1, the second one should be a type 2.
I'm still not educated enough on that to get a personal justification for that. I certainly believe the fire chief, but we just spent a lot of money on that brand new piece of equipment, and now we're somewhat saying it's obsolete if we go with only 2 pieces of equipment. So, okay.
So, any other questions from the board members? All overwhelmed?
How about
If I-
depressed?
Yeah, if I could try to maybe answer Director English's question a little clearer. A type 3 engine doesn't give us that same ability that a type 2 engine. My recommendation is that we have 2 type 1s and the type 3. That gives us that backup to the type 1. If we can't financially afford 3 apparatus, then as the general manager said, my preference would be to change out the type 3 to a type 2. So sell the type 3, purchase a type 2 to only have 2 pieces of equipment. That's taking into consideration that our type 3 right now is a great piece of equipment, and it helps us with those wildland fires in the community that a type 1 cannot get to, down in the riverbed, areas out in Peterson Ranch, are adjoining what we call our mutual threat zone with the county. Those areas are 4-wheel drive type areas where we can get the engine right next to a start of a vegetation fire and knock it out a lot quicker than having to park a type 1 on the street and do what's called a progressive hose lay, and that's laying line into that. So it's a great piece of equipment. I'd love to keep it, but if we can only have 2, as the general manager just said, I would prefer to go with the type 2 because that gives us the backup to the type 1, and I think that's imperative for the community to have that backup for a type 1.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, thank you. And I certainly support the type 3 when we bought it. It's a wonderful tool, given that we're kind of on the wildland interface zone. But isn't mutual aid provide the kind of backup that is necessary for the type 1? That was my understanding along, was that we had the type 1, but we also have mutual aid from Station 30 right down the road and from our partners on each side of us. So
Yeah,
I don't understand the need for a second backup piece of equipment at the cost that it's projected to have.
Again, when I'm talking about a backup to a type 1, when you're referring to the type 1s from our adjoining agencies, those are only strictly on a second engine coming into us. A backup for a type 1 is in the event that we have to take our type 1 engine down for maintenance. We have another backup engine, type 1 engine, that can cover that period of time that one's down for maintenance or repair or something along those lines. That during that period of time, if we break a structure fire, we still have that type 1 engine capability in-house to get on scene first and not wait that 10 or 15 minutes for our adjoining agencies to assist us as the second type 1 engine coming in. Engine 30 has been increasingly unreliable as our backup auto aid engine. Their response area is becoming larger and larger. We're hearing them on a regular basis getting dispatched out to Heritage Ranch to cover that station. That probably happens once or twice a week. They go halfway to Cambria, sometimes to Cambria, and clear out to the Chelan Y. So they've got an enormous response area, and it's just not reliable as far as them being our second engine in. They would not be a backup to our type 1. A backup to our type 1 would simply be if our type 1 goes down, we have another type 1 engine to fill its spot until it can get repaired.
Thank you.
With that, I have a question. If it's a backup for repairs and maintenance, how many what's the number of days that it would be out based on your past experience for repairs and maintenance? Because certainly going through the financial models, it's a big ticket item, and it's a matter of, we don't have the money. So do we go in the hole and take the risk to provide coverage for the backup of a type 1 that we have? And I'm not sure that it's justifiable. So how many days are we looking at annually that we have a type 1, our current type 1, out for service?
So if we have a new type 1, typically, I can't give you an
Well, go with our
accurate
existing
number,
one.
but a guess would be 2 to 3 weeks out of the year that it would be in for service, that it would have some type of calibration, a piece of equipment would be off of it, something along those lines. The other aspect is, having that reliability of the new type 1. That's the biggest thing. It won't be out of service nearly as much as the current 7195, which is becoming less and less reliable. So the purchase of a new type 1 would diminish that out of service time. But even from my prior agency, those engines go out of service, and sometimes you can't predict how long. And we've always had that backup capability of now Atascadero are obviously much larger bank account, much larger response area and more of a call volume, but they have 3 type 1s, actually 4 with the ladder truck. So it's always having that ability to cover your primary workhorse of an engine. That's concerned me. When I came on and saw the condition that 7195 was in, I think I told you guys back then that I was concerned about it, and it even concerns me more as we continue forward and look at a 17-month due date for a new piece of equipment. Again, it would be a sufficient backup with the repairs, and we wouldn't be depending upon it as much. But with our current staffing model, we're constantly down at our training grounds, training new folks, those types of things. During our academies, we hold those twice a year, where our type 1 engine is pumping, and we have lines deployed and those types of things for our reserves, our new reserves during the academy. That's 2 weeks out of the year that it's being used, where it's not available for immediate response to a structure fire. If we had that additional type 1 engine, then we would be able to jump into that engine and immediately respond without having to put everything back in service and be delayed by having everything deployed for our academy.
But in that scenario, it would be possible for Station 30 or even Atascadero or Paso Robles to respond to a structure fire in Templeton, correct?
Correct. Yeah, not within the NFPA guideline of 6 minutes,
Yeah.
because Tascadero and Paso are, 10 minutes out. Station 30, we would have to coordinate with them, and then if they get a call to cover Station 33 out at Heritage Ranch, they're out of the loop.
But that's what we're having to do today. Because we only have one type 1.
Correct. Yeah, that's the issue.
Okay. Director Giardini, you have your hand up.
Yeah, how many structure fires do we have a year?
I would have to look at the numbers. I think we had 5 this last year.
Within Templeton,
yeah.
Templeton?
Yeah, 5 structure fire responses. We had 2 working fires and 3 that were what I will call incipient phase. For example, like the one on Las Tablas, where it was in the wall and didn't require us to deploy lines or things of that nature. But it definitely could have, had it not been caught earlier.
So we had 2 true
Working.
structure fires this
Correct.
past year.
Right.
Okay, and I think, so the problem is we don't have enough money in our asset replacement fund. And so how do you suggest, I mean, if somebody came to me with this, how can you increase your asset replacement fund? I mean, that's what we need to do in order to get you what you want, because you're asking us to run what I consider personally huge deficits or unacceptable deficits. And so my question to you is then how do you propose to offset that? You mentioned in your presentation that the capital facilities fund monies were coming in, but did you run any data on what's out there to show us what that was? I mean, you didn't present anything. I sound like I'm picking on you and being mean. I'm really not. I'm just like, my mind is blown by these numbers. So I know you can get asset replacement funds through our capital facilities district, through property taxes, some through Measure A, some other unrestricted fees such as, out of county services. But I feel like we have the money up front to put a down payment on the house, but then we can't afford to carry the monthly mortgage is kind of how I'm feeling. And so I would like to have some brainstorming done on how to carry that monthly mortgage or how to increase our asset replacement fund so that we're not running such huge deficits.
Yeah,
And then
unfortunately. So
the
let
other
me just
thing,
comment on that one item, because tonight it's only for consideration of whether or not we move forward with the purchase.
right, and
of the new
I'm not entertaining that
Okay,
thought right now. I'm just saying, I mean, that's our problem. Our asset replacement fund isn't filled, right? And so, and we're being asked to run a deficit. And so the other things I look at is because of the recession in 2008, we didn't do asset replacement for 5 years. And now we're paying for that. Now our board is, and then we played catch up on our OPEB account too. And that was really difficult. And so I'm just really uncomfortable as much as I understand the need for this engine and the desire for it. It just seems like I just did not see a good option presented to me on in any of the tabs that gave us a way of getting there at this point in time without changing policies and without running a deficit. And both of those make me feel uncomfortable. as much as I've always supported the fire department, I'm uncomfortable with this. That's my gut.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I'm uncomfortable with it also. But I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that, you know, I've been hired to protect the community as the fire chief, and I have a piece of equipment that may not be able to do that. That makes me more uncomfortable.
And I was elected as a board member to make sure my fiduciary responsibility is I
Yep.
keep us whole.
Yep.
So both are equally important. So
Yep.
somehow we got to figure this out.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, other questions? Well, yeah, I think I share your concerns, Director Giardini. I mean, it's like there's no pretty option here. And I understand, Chief Peterson, your obligation and your desire to keep the community safe. To me, I'm uncomfortable with the way the numbers look. But I wanted to have this shared with all board members so that it kind of level sets where we're at. Because for me, going through this and our discussion at the fire committee meeting, it really shined the light on where we're at. And we're not in a good situation when it comes to asset replacement. Unfortunately, you know, hindsight's 2020, but it appears as though what we looked at was staffing a 24/7 fire station without looking at what is also the cost of some of the apparatus that it has to be maintained in a fire station. And, you know, certainly we didn't look at, well, we're moving from 24/7 to, or from a reserve to a 24/7. What does the fire station need to look like? And what are some of the expansions that need to take place to modify that and make it a 24/7 station? Then also looking at the equipment that has to be there. And so I think I'm feeling like, and I'll speak for me personally, is like I was short-sighted in perhaps what needed to all be considered, all factors. And I think perhaps we were short-sighted in looking at beyond just the staffing. So, you know, I'll take some responsibility for that. But unfortunately, I don't feel comfortable with any of the models. None of them are pretty. And I don't know that we're in a situation today, or feeling like we're in a situation today where we can make this decision. So those are just my thoughts. Director English? You're on mute.
Yes, I am on mute. I share the opinions of both Director Logan and Director Giardini previously. One is I fully take responsibility for some kind of lack of foresight in some of the decisions we made previously. If I would have known that or thought about it, that the type 3 was really not the best for us, that may have changed our decision back then. And you know, there's a number of decisions that we made, and I think we collectively have to take responsibility for where we are today. But I wanted to ask about the replacement or the repair of 7195. So we don't have enough money. This is probably not a great analogy, but it's an analogy nonetheless. So if you are a family and your car breaks down and you don't have enough money in the bank to buy a new car, and your transmission goes out, you don't buy a new car, you replace the transmission. You know, so if you don't have enough money, or you can't pay the payment for a new car. So it's not exactly the case here, but can we repair 7195 and get it in good run? It may cost us $100,000, just like you might have to pay $4,000 to replace your transmission, and limp along with that until we do set aside money so that we can actually have that asset replacement fund that we need. And I think some of our assumptions have been pretty conservative over the last few years. Property tax was one, our CFD was another. And so my guess is that in the next couple of years, I mean, that we may have a better financial picture. Inflation may ruin that, but anyway, so I think I'm kind of leaning toward or asking the question, is that a viable option to repair 7195 as we squirrel away money? Personally, I am not in favor of using capital funds if it means we have to have 3 pieces of equipment and we have to set aside asset depreciation for all 3. And it just digs the hole deeper. So, my question to the chief and the general managers, what is the viability of repairing that and making it work?
Well, 7195 from the recommendations I've gotten from South Coast is that we are putting a significant amount of money into a 20-year-old engine. What's going to go wrong next? Can it be repaired and limp along? Yeah, I mean, we can continue to, as issues come up, repair them. I just don't know what the downtime of a particular issue is going to be. So for example, if we have a transmission or the pump issue, how long is that repair going to take? And then how long does that leave us without a Type 1 engine? So those are some of my concerns, some of my balancing acts with regards to, a Type 1 and a Type 2 engine, 2 Type 1s and a Type 3, understanding our fiscal constraints. I mean, I completely appreciate, the position that the board is in with regards to having to make this decision. And, I'm trying to come up with the best alternatives that we can. I think the general manager has come up with some, great options great options, from putting them on paper, not great options financially. But as far as repairing 95 for any long-term period to provide enough funding to purchase a new Type 1, I don't know. I can't give you a valid answer there because I just don't know what's going to go wrong next with, again, a 20-year-old engine. That's typically the end of life for a piece of apparatus is 20 years. I know that in Atascadero, those engines are approaching 16 years and they're looking at replacing 2 of them. So repairs Olympus along, but yeah.
Okay, Director English?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, it wasn't that long ago, we invested a lot of money in 95 to make it a better, so there are certain assets on that engine that are not 20 years old. Because I forget, Jeff, what we spend $300,000 renovating that piece of equipment. So, I see people driving around 1976 Mustangs that are in beautiful condition because they keep investing in them. So, I want to just back up a little bit and say we'd made a significant investment. It's not necessarily a 20-year-old vehicle.
So if I can kind of give you this analogy, if somebody's got a 20-year-old car and they redo the interior, redo some of the dash, put a paint job on it. I don't know everything that was done with 7195, but I know that they didn't touch the engine, they didn't touch the transmission, they didn't touch the pump or any of the valves with regards to its pumping abilities. And that's one of the other issues we're having is we're having blow by on some of the valves that are causing them to leak into pre-connected fire hose. So I don't believe that they did anything with regards to the major components of the engine, the electrical system, the engine, the transmission, the pump, those larger drivetrain items.
So I guess it comes down to though, are you frozen? Is your screen frozen, Chief Peterson? Okay, are you
No,
finished?
I don't, yeah,
Okay.
I don't think I am.
Okay, so I think it comes down to, the cost of a new engine versus making the repairs on the existing 7195. I think, the thought is that the repairs have got to be less than what the cost of a new engine would be. And it sounds like, if the purchase of a new engine is going to be up to potentially 2 years, the reliability of 7195 is not where it needs to be today. So we would still have to make those repairs.
Correct.
And so it might make sense that we make the repairs, look at perhaps a new engine in a year or two, and consider it then and see if we're in a different situation.
Yeah, and the reason that it was brought at this point was just so the board is aware that, why we brought it so quickly was this price increase that's taking place on February 1st.
Yeah.
We've also been told by other manufacturers there could be another price increase in July. So
I think, given
full
inflation,
awareness.
I think it will.
Yeah. Yeah, and full awareness, that's the main reason we're bringing it forth now is I didn't think $100,000 was $100,000 or 83,000 was something that I wanted to just go, well, we'll just do it later.
Yeah. Director Peterson, you've been quiet on the subject. Would you like to weigh in?
No, but I will, I guess. I guess I would like to join the other three directors that have talked about this, and I really feel really stupid that we didn't look at this back when we were talking about all of this, because I just can't believe that we're talking about doing this now and we didn't think about it back then, and I really feel responsible for that. This is something that I'm supposed to know something about, but having said that, I do know that every one of us who were on the board when we passed Measure A swore up and down to all of our constituents that we would not come back to them again for, we got this, we're sailing. Well, that's not the truth. And I mean, Cayucas found out that the second time around, they failed. And I would hate to say, okay, I would like to say, yeah, let's buy all the stuff that we need. But I don't think we can afford it. I haven't seen any of the options that, I would feel comfortable with. And I don't know what the problem is, but I think that we're really thinking this whole bigger, and at some point, I don't want to be on the board and have to go back to the public and say, hey, guess what? We lied to you. So, again, unless I can see some kind of an option that we can buy something and move forward and not be digging this hole. Sure, I can think of a lot of things maybe that will happen, that it won't be as dire a position that we're in, that we're looking at with all of these options. But I really have a problem, moving forward with this under the current circumstances. So, I think we're just going to have to invest in repairing our current engine, or whatever we do, the current engine's got to be cheaper than what we're talking about doing. So anyway, I don't know if that helps any, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Okay, thank you. Director Fardanish, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. At this point, just looking at the numbers is just, they're shocking. And as Director Giardini said, depressing. It's, it's challenging. And, I feel really, I feel bad for you, Chief Peterson, as well as the staff. We should be able to give you the equipment that you need to be able to do your job. unfortunately, it's just things are so expensive, and there was some time that we didn't put enough money aside for asset replacement. My thought right now is that we do need to get to the point to get you a Type 1 engine. And I just think that we need to figure out a way. And but for now, and I realize that the price is going to go up, in February 1st. But I think that's something that we have to accept because I really don't want to get in a situation where the whole fire department is in financial crisis because of the decisions, of this decision. So at least my thought is, we know that we have to, we want to repair our existing engine for backup purposes down the, so at least let's do that. Let's take care of it. And, it's like, we have looked at options before where we have refurbished the whole engine. We purchased the engine, had a whole refurbished. Maybe that would be less expensive, or work on this engine that we have and just, put extensive amount of, money into it, maybe $300,000 or $400,000 and get it fully refurbished if need to be, and, work with it, because I just don't feel comfortable with the numbers as they are right now. And, and I just think we just maybe need to wait and realize that I know the price is going to go higher, but I think we just need to wait and repair what we have right now.
General Manager Brils.
Yeah, just want to clarify one item, and that there's been some discussion about it's the asset replacement fund that's low. Just keep in mind, for all intents and purposes, it's just another line item in your budget. It just takes any non-restricted revenue source that would allow you to increase that contribution. The only thing that's a little different about it is the board has at times opted not to put money in there. Like, again, 5 years, about 12 years ago, for about 5 years, and that's some of the impact. So during the fire committee meeting, there was some discussion about revenue sources and things like a more robust participation in the out-of-county program and the kinds of funds that might bring in. And the fire chief has done a little bit of kind of modeling to see how much money that might bring in. It's kind of unpredictable, not a steady source of income, but it is not immaterial. It could be a material source of additional revenue. First responder fees, something that we've discussed from time to time. We knew that wasn't going to ever solve the problem, but could be another source of income. So if any sources of non-restricted income increase from the 2019 financial model, it would improve the outlook. So including new sources of income, such as, for example, I'm going to rephrase that, the out-of-county kind of revenue we haven't done for many years or for several years. And so it's not included in our financial modeling, nor is it included in our current year's budget. But if we had a track record, or some predictable participation that we would be doing, then that would become a revenue source that would assist. I don't know that it would, in any of these particular sources, would close the gap, depending on which way you chose to go. Yeah, we've got a pretty tight forecast.
Okay, and I should also mention that with the out-of-county support services, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief Peterson, that really couldn't be done unless we had a backup Type 1. Because we couldn't send our existing Type 1, if we only have 2 engines, we couldn't send our Type 1
No,
out of county.
we would strictly send the Type 3. We would not send the Type 1 out.
Okay.
The Type 3, from the data that I've gathered and presented to the fire committee, shows that, like, for example, using San Miguel as their example, was about $40,000 a year, which would make up the asset replacement for a particular piece of equipment. That would cover it, and that would change that model significantly. Now, as General Manager Brilt said, Yeah, we don't have a track record of that yet. I just brought on 7 new reserve firefighters, so I'm optimistic about this summer. But you know, it's going to be dependent upon how available those reserve folks are. Our first and foremost priority is to cover the community. And then if we have the additional staff available, to send an engine out. And that does provide a pretty significant amount of income for the district that could cover some of that asset replacement. Like I say, San Miguel has been recognizing about a $40,000 annual income just on the engine. So it's not insignificant.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. Director Giardini, you had your hand up? Yeah,
You're muted.
You're muted.
There we go. Piggybacking back on General Manager Briltz's comments and Chief Peterson's comments just now. Can we hold some kind of meeting or a workshop looking at just asset replacement and brainstorming? Because, you know, if we send our Type 3 engine out this summer, then we would have some kind of statistics on it. Can we get revenue from the ambulance company? What revenue would be generated by out of county responses? You know, looking at property tax increases, projections, would that help our situation out? Can we, instead of how we divide up our property taxes between fire and rec department, can that model change? Community facilities district, can we give it all to the fire department, or do we need to share it with the rec department? You know, the rec department I thought was in better shape since we merged it with the waste management, but it would help me, and maybe I'm the only one, but if we could figure out and understand better how to fund our asset replacement, because not only are we looking at the fire engine, but we're looking at the fire station too, and we need to get, that's going to have a depreciation cost with it too, and we're going to need to have funding in there for that too. So my suggestion would be to hold some kind of workshop, or just as one of our meetings specifically designated to asset replacement conversation, so that we can figure out how to solve this problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think some of the conversation I think would be appropriate for the finance committee when it goes through the budget process. General Manager Briltz, do you have any thoughts on the matter?
No, I mean, I think, I don't think you should get too hung up on whether asset replacement's the problem. I focused on it today because this had a very direct impact to it, but the reality is it's just another line item in our fire funds budget. And you could create savings elsewhere within the fund, and that would help it. And if you created, if any of the revenue sources that the fire fund receives, the operating fund, could all contribute to asset replacement, or just like any other line item. So it's really just a revenue and expenditure issue. I know that's oversimplifying it, but you don't need to necessarily dive down into how to contribute to asset replacement, because if we brought in any other sources of revenue to the fire fund, it would assist in keeping us whole and allowing the asset replacement line item to grow.
Well,
So,
would that be an appropriate conversation within the finance committee is my question.
Sure. Or, you know, we reviewed these various assumptions in a great deal of detail with the fire committee in August, and we could do that just board wide if it would be helpful.
Yeah.
You know, maybe again after we have real numbers for this fiscal year, so then you'd have another year into the model, and that might give you more confidence, or might not. It's just going to depend about whether you think the assumptions are too conservative or there are areas that are concerning.
Yeah. Director English, you had a comment?
Yeah, good conversation. Thank you. Yeah, I would be in favor of, as part of our budget development, we're really not that far away from starting to work on our budget. We're just a couple months away from it. When we have some good information from this last fiscal year, really focusing on some, revenue expenditure issues, particularly in fire, where we could reduce costs. I think there's probably room in some areas to reduce costs. There's certainly the CFDs. We have not yet made a decision on how to use the CFD funds. This is probably one of our higher priorities. And so we have some decisions to make, I think, that are appropriate as we develop this next year's budget. But I think that's a good conversation for us to have. And we started it tonight. So those are I'm not in support of moving forward with the purchase tonight.
Okay. I don't think, based on the comments from all the directors, I don't think anyone expressed a desire to move forward with the purchase of a new Type 1 engine at this point in time. Do we need a formal roll call mentioning that?
You do not. I mean,
Okay.
this was this, you'd only need a vote if you were going to
Make the
make a
purchase.
budget amendment or change or make an authorization.
Yeah, yeah. Director Fardanish, you have a comment?
Yeah, no problem. Do we need to give direction in terms of repairing of the fire engine one that we have, or that's something that's already in the budget and taken care of?
It is not in the budget, but we can come back with a budget amendment or include it in our mid. We're hearing it loud and clear that you don't want to see the repair delayed, and so we can come back with a separate line item at a future meeting, or simply incorporate that repair line item into the mid-year budget adjustments that is already scheduled to come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, Director Giardini.
Just a question. So are we also giving direction to the finance committee to look at brainstorming revenues and that kind of stuff, or not?
I don't know about brainstorming revenue, but really certainly how revenue is being, what line items. Because I think what General Manager Brotz is saying, that some of the unrestricted funds, we could move those funds around. So I think that's kind of going to be, I think, appropriate for the Finance Committee to look at. Does that answer your question? I think in terms
Well,
of.
I think the finance committee's job is that and making sure we stay whole. So I guess, yes.
Okay, all right. Any other comments on this particular topic before we move to the committee report? Okay, then let's move to the committee report. Director Giardini, would you like to provide a synopsis of that, which chunk of that we already discussed?
I was going to say, we discussed it. I don't know what I did with the, I printed out tonight's. Oh, I think I put it in here. Here we go. We also talked about the grants that Chief Peterson was applying for, and that it would be $350,000 for new turnout gear. And so that was a welcomed information. And then he's also applying for a SAFER grant, which we know that the fire department has received before. And he is using some of the wording for somebody who just got a SAFER grant, so that hopefully it'll knock it out of the park and we'll get the SAFER grant too. And then also the status on the fire station was the gentleman who, the architect who the board decided to give him the go-ahead on doing the fire station conceptual plans, came out to the site and met with Chief Peterson and walked the site. That was about it. And then that the department received a donation of $7,000 and that the donator wanted to remain anonymous.
Okay. Any questions regarding, I think all the directors received a copy via email. Our board secretary sent that out to all the directors, the minutes of that meeting. And I don't know if anyone has any questions at this time. Okay, well, if not, thank you all, and thank you very much, General Manager Brills, for preparing the financial analysis. And Chief Peterson, thank you for your presentation. We do, as a board, take your recommendations seriously. I think the challenge for this board will be, how do we find the funds to provide you with what you need? And in the meantime, we'll just have to kind of make do with the goal that we will get eventually a type 1. So thank you. Director Fardanish, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I do have a comment to make for the director's comments. So the structure fire that was mentioned earlier today was actually my next door neighbor. And it happened 4 a.m. Fortunately, nobody was hurt or no major damages. But I was speaking to my neighbor, and he was really impressed with the professionalism of our staff, how detailed they were, and how helpful they were. And he said that they were there under 5 minutes, so that made him really, feel good about it. And he was really happy that he voted yes on Measure A. So he just wanted me to let you guys know how appreciative it was. Also, to top it all off, he was very impressed that the next day, one of the fire staff actually went over to him the next day and asked how he was doing. So it made him feel really good that he's lives in a town that people care about him. So I just wanted to let you know about that, and it's great to have a fire department like you guys. So I really appreciate it, and he does as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's always good to hear. We know we have the finest fire department. Now we just need to figure out is how do we give them the best tools to do their job. So please don't lose the faith. So any other comments before we adjourn? Okay, well, thank you everyone for this special meeting. Let me just mention that there were 2 items for February, I believe February 1st meeting, our regularly scheduled board meeting. And it appears that those items will not be ready for the board. So that meeting will probably be canceled. So there will be a cancellation notice that our board secretary will be giving out based on the dialogue that General Manager and I had this afternoon. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.